Okay, good morning, everybody. I am David Riley and I am the chair of the Warwickshire Police and Crime Panel. Thank you for attending this morning. And this morning is an appointment hearing to the post of Chief Executive for the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office of Warwickshire. Polly, good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Thanks very much.
As you know, today we're going to ask you a few questions, and as part of the appointment hearing, we will then make a recommendation to the Police and Crime Commissioner about your appointment to the role of Chief Executive. I know this is a really weird environment being online, and clearly this is a challenging interview with 10 people sitting in front of you electronically, but please feel free to speak. And if you see any of us furiously writing or anything, don't worry about it. It's just that we're obviously making notes for the selection procedure. What we're going to do is ask you a few questions, and at the end of the interview, you'll have an opportunity to say anything to us or that you'd like to ask us. We will then go into a private session where we will consider the application, and then we'll come back online and update the PCC and yourself in our deliberations. Before we start, is there anything that you would like to do or say to us, Polly, before we formally start the interview?
No, not at all. Just to say thanks for having me.
Okay, brilliant.
Sorry,
colleagues, I know that. Hello, Jane. Are you saying something?
Yes, can we take apologies and any disclosures of interest, please?
Yes, well, that's well reminded, Jane. Well reminded. So, Deb, do we have any apologies for today's meeting, please?
Chair, we have apologies from Councillors Ian Davison and Andy Wright, and also from independent member Andy Davis.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Colleagues, can I just take you to agenda item 1.2, which is the disclosure of pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests in today's agenda, which is the sole agenda item around the appointment of the Chief Executive. Does anybody have any interests? No? Thank you very much indeed. So in that case, then we'll move on to agenda item number 2, which is the confirmation hearing. Before we actually start the interview, I'd like to invite Philip Second, the Police and Crime Commissioner, to introduce the candidate. Philip.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you all healthier on the screen. So I'm just going to say a few words about Polly and a little bit about the process and some of the reasons that I have selected her as our new Chief Executive in the office in Warwick. Polly got a degree in modern languages, a BA at Nottingham University, and then since has worked principally in local government and I think has picked up quite a lot of experience in the public sector. So that involved working in education and training in Herefordshire Council for a couple of years, child social care, improvement works at Sandwell for 18 months on secondment, improvement in efficiency work in the West Midlands based at Worcestershire County Council for 7 years, followed by head of business service, and her current job is at the West Midlands office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, where she's been for 3 years. And you'll have picked up in some of the paperwork that she has a number of outside interests and is a vice chair of the governors at the Meadows First School and has been for the last 3 years. During her period at the OPC in the West Midlands, OPCC, she's been, as I said, head of business services, acted shortly as the chief executive over there, which I think was a good experience for the role that I would like her to do in Warwickshire. I've picked out, and we asked questions ourselves at our meeting to select a new chief exec. Some of the pluses I think she can bring to Warwickshire is good experience in developing strategies and plans, performance management, budgeting and monitoring, producing comprehensive reports, a lot of partnership working. And actually, I've come across Polly twice in my period over the last 4 years, principally in the regional governance group, which is the decision-making body of the 4 PCCs in the West Midlands. And she particularly led for all of the PCCs on the PEQF programme, which was about recruiting and degrees and how we organised that in the West Midlands, and we've linked up with Staffordshire University to run those sort of degree courses for us. And I have to say, we're very pleased with that, and it's working out well for the force here in Warwickshire. As far as the actual sort of recruitment process was concerned, it was pretty widely advertised on the usual websites, excuse me, and advertising for this sort of job. We had 14 pretty good applications for the job, and myself and the chief executive and a member of the force HR came along to help us. We did a sift, and we reduced that list from 14 down to 5. We then had a physical day where we all met, socially distanced, of course, at Leek Wootton, and interviewed all 5 of the shortlisters, and Polly was selected unanimously by the panel. And the panel comprised myself, Chief Constable Martin Jelly, who you know well, and Monica Fogarty, who's the Chief Executive of Warwickshire County Council. And the last 5 were all appointable, all selectable by me, but Polly stood out, and I'm delighted that she is now with us here today in front of your panel, Chair. I think that's all I need to say.
Okay, thank you, Philip. Well, Polly, goodness me, that's an introduction to behold, isn't it? So we've now got really high expectations of what you're going to do. So, and that's not a bad way to start the interview, is it?
No,
Okay.
thanks.
So
I hope I
we've
live
got
up to them.
Okay, good. Right, we've got an order of questions, and I'm going to introduce you to Councillor Maggie O'Rourke, who's...
You've gone on to mute.
Oh, was that me or Maggie that was on mute?
That was you.
Oh, goodness me. All right. It's going really swimmingly well, isn't it? Okay. So we've got a series of questions for you, Polly, and first person I'm going to ask to speak is Councillor Maggie O'Rourke. So, Maggie, do you have a question for Polly?
I do. And hello, Polly, and welcome. It's
Thank you.
good to see you. You all know, obviously, Warwickshire is very widely geographically spread out. So my question is, how would you build a fair and responsive service that engages effectively with all of our communities right across Warwickshire?
Thank you for your question. Nice to meet you virtually. I think that's a really important point, and I'd like to kind of emphasise at the start of my responses that I'm really clear that the role of the PCC is about serving the community in which he or she is elected. So it's really important to make sure that that there is coverage across the whole of Warwickshire. As you point out, it's a large county and it's a varied county. I think there's a record number of other counties that butt up against your borders as well. So there's a lot of opportunity to engage with others and those on the borders. In terms of engaging with the electorate, the people of Warwickshire, I'm aware that the PCC's office already have a lot of efforts in this area, and like everyone else, that used to be very much based on getting out and about and going to see communities and hearing from communities. And I believe I read in one of the strategies that Philip's approach was largely to dovetail with other events that were going on in the region, in the county. But of course, latterly, all of that's come to a bit of an end, and it's about digital engagement and online engagement. So what that tells me about Warwickshire is that it's really important to be responsive, to be able to use the mechanisms that are already existing. It's a small OPCC office, so it's important to use resources wisely to engage widely. But it's really important, and there were many different communities, many different people who have different interests and different levels of engagement in the PCC's office. And in our office, we need to make sure that we build a strategy and an approach that is suitable for them.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. And that's a really interesting question because it's pertinent to some work that we were discussing at our last police and crime panel meeting with Philip around the BAME ethnicity of Warwickshire Police and its diversity and its exit strategy. So it's really great to hear that you've got some background experience already, because it's one of the areas that we are currently scrutinising as we sit here at the moment. And a police force has to represent the community it serves, doesn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And your ethnicity, I've had a look at your ethnicity data and how you're working with the force to encourage them, as you say, to represent the community that they serve. And I know that you're making good efforts in that area. I was also pleased to see that the PCC's office takes diversity seriously as well. And I watched your previous panel meeting and I saw you talking about that in some depth. I think that's really important. It's obviously a live national issue too. You may have seen from my application that I am the workforce policy lead in the PCC's office in the West Midlands, and part of that means I've got responsibility for diversity and inclusion. And I do that in two ways. One, in terms of the holding to account function for the force, so questioning their strategies and their approaches to diversity and also inclusion. And then secondly, to how that works in the PCC's office as well. And I've looked at the recruitment approaches and pipelines across both organisations and to try to identify where there's bias or where there are potential issues. I'd like to also pick up on something which I think you also covered in your last panel meeting, that it's not just about kind of getting numbers through the door. It's also about ensuring that the environment is inclusive for people who work in the organisation. And the issue of the day is very much about ethnicity and BAME representation, but it's not just about that. It's also about gender, and also particularly I think an issue for many forces, and you've articulated it for Warwickshire, is it's an issue about the age of the workforce, that if you've got very young police officers coming in, making sure that there is a culture there that adapts to the youth, but also provide support and experience appropriately so that those police officers can develop in role and become well established in what they're doing.
Okay, thank you. That's a nice answer, and you go on to touch on your ability and your skills around scrutinising, which is something we will return to during this interview. Sure. So I'm now going to invite in my colleague Sarah Wally-Hoggins. Sarah, you have a question.
I do. Hello, welcome, Pauline. How nice to see you today. Solly, could you tell us, please, what difference have you made to policing in the West Midlands?
Thanks for the question. It's quite a broad-ranging answer I could give. I think I'll start where I just finished in the previous question, actually. So one of my responsibilities at the moment is around the holding to account specifically around workforce policy. So I have engaged heavily with the force around all of their plans for workforce. I've just talked about diversity, but I've also worked on learning and development, on officer recruitment, and on promotions and other internal processes. I have worked hard around the uplift programme to support and challenge the force to be able to deliver a large number of new police officers into the force, and I've provided quite a lot of scrutiny and challenge around their processes and all the cogs that need to take place to recruit officers. I've also, as Philip mentioned in his intro, worked collectively across the 4 forces in the West Midlands around the implementation of the PEQF programme. So I took part in the specification writing, the plans before the specification writing, so the initial discussions around how the changes to police training could look, what was coming down the track and what it might look like. And then I participated in the processes around securing agreement for a regional approach, having identified what the benefits of that would be. Participated in the tender process, the commissioning process, and the selection of the contractor, who, as Philip mentioned, is Staffordshire University. And it was a really big job, actually. And so it's a very large contract, and it was a really large piece of work to negotiate and agree that between the 4 forces. But of course, the work doesn't stop there. Once the contract's in place, it's actually about bringing those changes into each of the 4 forces, and each force being able to deliver the changes that they need and that they've signed up to in a way that works in the force area. So I recall quite early on Warwickshire saying that they wanted to put some extra weeks into the initial training to enable their officers to settle well. And other forces after that came up with tweaks and changes as well. So I think, to answer your question, my example is about the policing workforce, and I'd suggest that I've had a role across the whole region in respect of how those changes have been brought in, and I think that's made a difference to policing.
Okay, Sarah, do you have any other questions?
So the question I've got then to follow on from that is, so how's that transferred then to crime in the West Midlands and how the public perceive police?
Yep, it's in respect of the workforce, I guess there's a national position around increasing the numbers of officers, and this programme, the timing dovetailed. So in the West Midlands, the increase in officer numbers was very much through this new policing contract. The output is obviously more officers on the street, some of whom are still in training at the moment, as it's a relatively new piece of work. I think this very much corresponds to the public's sense of fear of crime, perception of crime, visibility of policing, ensuring that there are officers available when they need them. But then also each force, and I've seen the West Midlands force, and I know there's something similar in Warwickshire, about how the new officers are going to be deployed. So assessing the new types of crime, looking at the existing areas where further police officers are required, and of course looking at things like the HMIC reports to see what they're saying about where the force needs to put extra capacity as well.
Okay, thanks very much indeed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And again, another area that we'll be discussing during this interview around partnership working and cross-force collaboration. Again, so you're touching on the right areas as we're going through. So I'll now introduce you to Councillor Derek Poole, who is the Vice Chair of the Police and Crime Panel and who has a question. Derek.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Polly, and welcome. My question is, what do you think the main challenges are facing you and Warwickshire?
Me and Warwickshire, did you say?
Yeah, or you, Warwickshire and yourself, yeah.
Right, okay. I'll start with Warwickshire, shall I? So I think there are some challenges that are probably facing all of policing, actually, and they're around budget setting, the CSR, the upcoming election. It would be somewhat remiss of me not to say coronavirus in there, and also things like Brexit that are coming down the line. I've touched on other issues such as changing types of crime as well. And I think collaboration is a big deal nationally. Certainly, of course, that's a big deal in Warwickshire. That's one of the big issues that you've been grappling with over the last few years. I think there's a very exciting time ahead in Warwickshire, actually, as you come to the end of the alliance arrangements and you strike out with new partners and indeed on your own, and you set up the new arrangements and also the corresponding new culture in Warwickshire for what the next years are going to look like. I think also in Warwickshire, this was part of the first question, I guess, but Warwickshire's a very large county, centrally placed, one of the smaller police forces, and smaller budgets that go with that, I guess. But there's a lot of things that happen in Warwickshire. It's the centre of the UK, really, isn't it? So you're very much touched by a lot of the other activities that are going on around you, as well as what's happening in actual Warwickshire. So I'm thinking, for example, roads policing. You've got a lot of motorways coming through your area, and the impacts of that in terms of trafficking, modern slavery, as well as the actual roads related issues. County lines, not just from West Midlands, but from other, big towns and cities around you, and how that affects the people of Warwickshire and their perception of policing in Warwickshire. So to answer the second part of your question, in terms of the challenges for me, I guess all of that to start off with. There is I understand there's a really strong sense of partnership and collaboration in the county, and that people work together and pool resources, but pool efforts and ideas. So I think it's really important for me to get to know the people of Warwickshire and to meet the partners and meet the colleagues and understand what plans are in place and what we can do collectively. Collaboration is possible certainly within Warwickshire, and I know you've got some arrangements that are coming into place regionally as well. I'm thinking of West Midlands, for example. So I think that's the main thing for me is about kind of getting there and meeting everybody and getting going.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And again, a nice expansive answer that talks about that issue of relationships, that talks about that issue of joint problem solving. And yeah, Warwickshire is interesting, isn't it? Because we're the centre of the motorway network, and you recognise that motorway network presents a challenge because we live amongst cities. In fact, we've got Coventry right in the middle of us, which it always feels a bit strange when you look at Warwickshire, because we're two halves connected by a little bit on the side. So
it's taken out of the middle, isn't there?
It is. So we do certainly face the challenges of policing an urban community, albeit we're a rural community. So we have all the challenges of cities present, but in a rural environment. So let's move you on and let's introduce you to Peter Gilbert, Councillor Peter Gilbert. Peter, you have a question.
Hello, thank you, Chair. Chair, my camera, my technology, as soon as I put the camera on, the microphone packs in, and I don't know whether that is. Now, you'll when you do meet me, Polly, you'll realise that every cloud has a silver lining, so this technological breakdown is not making any of the panel miss much not seeing me. But I have a question in this conversational tone that we've struck, but it's a three-part conversation. Obviously, you have a very serious role here, a very important role. And within that role comes governance and management and leadership responsibilities, as is outlined in the job spec. And I'm interested to see how you would motivate your subordinates to achieve those objectives that have been set out, how you would motivate them to do them, and also how you would deal with those objectives not being met, how you would deal with maybe a failure to succeed. It would be interesting to know how you motivate subordinates and how you, I don't want to use the word reprimand, but challenge them when they've not been achieved, or challenge them when there's a serious problem and misconduct or so on, whatever comes forward during the average working year.
Thank you for your question. In my current role, I am the head of business services, as you know, and the span of that role includes the HR function for West Midlands OPCC. And my understanding is that we do that slightly different to Warwickshire OPCC, so we run quite some of the HR functions in-house. So I've got quite a lot of experience, which I'll tell you about now, in respect of HR processes and approaches. But before I do, I will just confirm that I've been a manager now for actually most of my career, and more than 15 years, and I've managed many different teams of all shapes and sizes. I've carried out reorganisations, I've developed new teams, and I've reviewed in the West Midlands across the span of the office around ensuring that the team meets the objectives that are required in respect of having the right roles and functions in place. In terms of my management style, I'm sure you kind of getting to understand me a bit through this panel, but I've got quite a warm and approachable style. I encourage a good two-way relationship with team members, but I'm absolutely I'm very well organised and have quite a structured way of approaching my work, and that translates into how I manage teams. So I would ensure that there was a strong focus around performance, setting objectives at the start of the year, reviewing objectives, regular series of one-to-one meetings, also regular team meetings and things like that, so people understand what's going on and understand how they might want to tweak their approach to the objectives that we might have set. I have a style of approaching people who are missing their objectives. Get in there early, give people a quick understanding of what they're doing wrong so that they have a chance to put corrective action in place, identify if training and development is required, and then, as you suggest, but from time to time that these softer things don't always work, and you're into either performance management or capability. And I have seen those processes through to the end in my previous careers, so I have the full experience of that. You also mentioned misconduct. The pages of the staff handbook that I have on my desk are well thumbed in all of these areas. I've got experience of dealing with misconduct, disciplinaries, employment tribunals even. So I would say it's fairly wide-ranging experience in that area. I'd just also quite like to touch on where I thought you might be going with a question at the start around the governance arrangements and the seriousness of the role, around the role of monitoring officer. So the role encompasses the head of paid services and the role of monitoring officer. So my responsibilities in respect of making sure that people behave in the way that they should be behaving in their roles extend further than just for the staff of the office. And I've got a really good understanding of what that means and how that works, and how I'd need to engage appropriately with others in those sorts of difficult situations. It's probably appropriate to say that I understand confidentiality and sensitivity of some of the issues that might arise. And I also work in respect of the Nolan principles. I know them well, and that is kind of my starting point and my standard for how I'd address difficult situations. Is that what you were looking for?
Peter, is there a follow-up question, or are you happy with that?
No, I should have gone down the monitoring officer route. Maybe that was somewhere I would have gone. So thank you for answering that. And obviously you understand about the healthy relationship you would need to have with, say, for example, the chair of this committee and other bodies, and how those relationships are developed from scratch and established. Yeah.
So in my current role, I work with the police and crime panel. I work with them in a number of areas. So I'm the link officer to the panel in respect of helping them shape their agenda and their work plan, and providing or commissioning reports as requested to the panel. I also liaise with the panel in respect of complaints, and I understand here that you have delegated the complaints function to the role of the chief executive. So that is something that we would, of course, work closely on. I've also commissioned training for panel members, and particularly at induction time. But of course, if I was if and when I arrive in role, I'd like to ask you to support me in my induction as well. So I'd like to meet and understand what your priorities are.
Okay, thank you, Polly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Peter. And again, clearly we consider the role of monitoring officer and the independence of the monitor officer and the integrity of the role to be fundamentally important to an effective performance of the chief exec role. And you know, I know it's your interview, but I would very much like to recognise the excellent work that Neil has done as your predecessor potentially in bringing those qualities to this role. So fundamentally important without any doubt. So let me introduce you now to Councillor Jenny Fradley. Jenny.
Thank you, Chair. Hi. As you mentioned in your personal statement, you make a point of furthering your career in the Shire counties. Could I just ask what you see as the unique challenges of that a Shire county presents, and how you'll develop the relationships with the scattered rural populations with a relatively small police force?
Yeah. I think I touched on this earlier in respect of the police force side of it, and it's absolutely about the communities having a sense of visibility in respect of their police offer. And as I kind of said, that's not just about faces, boots on the beat, I think is the phrase. It's also about an online presence, you know, being able to report crime quickly and efficiently, not being hanging on the phone for a long time, digital response for those who want to use that. More broadly, in respect of your question about Shire counties, I've worked in a number of Shire counties. I live in one. I have engaged with, there's a role which you might have seen on my statement, that I was the chair of the independent remuneration panel for the district councils in Worcestershire for a period. So I engaged with councillors across all of the district councils. So I understand the makeup of Shire counties with their districts and unitaries, although I see that is a live discussion in Warwickshire as we speak. And what that means for me, certainly, is that there are more partners to engage with, and it's appropriate to engage across the spectrum of who the partners are and understand what their issues are and be able to translate that back. We've touched already on issues of rural counties, and certainly I believe this to be the case in Warwickshire, that, as you say, it's a small police force, it's a small OPCC, but geographically it's a really large area to span, and it's important to not offer a service that's only available to those who are in, for example, Warwick or whatever the town that the office is based in. That it's really important that we get across the whole county, and the communities who are more distant do not feel more isolated from whatever the service that's offered is.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Chair.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. Let's just move on to Nicola. Nicola was the previous chair of the panel. Nicola Davis, Councillor Nicola Davis.
Good morning, Polly. It's really nice to meet you.
Hi.
I wondered if you'd share with us some of your experience of dealing with complex issues that have a political dimension or maybe attract media interest, and the sensitivities that might require.
Yes. I think I'll give an example of working with in an employment situation. So this is a complex issue in respect of a I just working out how I'm going to describe this to you, and the whole world on YouTube.
Very tricky questions, and you have to think on your feet. So we all know how that feels. So
yeah, it was quite difficult to articulate the sensitivities of a question so publicly, actually. So forgive me if I'm slightly vague. So I have dealt with an issue of an appointment which came into the public domain and was not wholly welcomed by the public. And it was important for me to consider the release of information, consider how this information came out to the public, and to consider in that the impact on all the individuals involved. So the impact on the PCC in respect of his reputation and how his reputation might be affected, the impact on victims or those who've been affected by the behaviours of the individual, and the impact on those who know the individual or knew the individual and are having to reframe a situation or rewrite history. I feel that that's a really vague answer, but it's, as I say, it's quite hard to give a clearer answer so publicly. But if there's more that you want to tease from me, then please do.
No, that was very adept, and I know it is a difficult question to answer and to illustrate with examples by the very nature of the question, but you show sort of that awareness and that sensitivity of the need to handle things in a very careful way. So thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, then so that's all of our pre-arranged questions, other than mine, which is always good as the chair, isn't it? And I heard you mention performance. Mm-hmm. So tell me what performance means to the role of the chief exec.
That's a good question. I think it means a lot of things. So I'm drawing a little wheel in my head as I'm speaking to you. So I'll start off with the performance of the PCC in respect of the commitments that he makes to the public at the start of his terms of office, and how that translates into the police and crime plan and the priorities of both the Commissioner's office, but also the holding to account arrangements with the force. The performance then of that plan, so the monitoring of how that plan is delivered. Secondly, then, the performance as judged by HMIC, as judged by the government, and as judged by the public in respect of the metrics and comparators that they might make with other forces across the country. Then there is performance on specific projects or commissioning activities. I know the Commissioner's office will have responsibility around commissioning and grants and contracts. So ensuring that contracts are monitored effectively, that value for money is sought, that successful outcomes in whatever is required are found. Then we have performance of teams, performance of those who work in the office, and I've outlined a little bit my views around how I would monitor performance of individuals. I think that's in some ways the most important element of performance actually is around setting a really clear level of expectation and then enabling people to deliver that in all of those areas. I do have experience of developing techie performance data sets and analysing performance information, producing graphs and things like that as well.
Okay, nice one. And that's a really good illustration of the breadth of the performance that comes to the challenge of the role. Now tell me what performance means to Polly Reid.
I like that question. So performance to me, I think I said earlier in this session that I'm a well-organised person. So personally for me, performance is about achieving things. So having a really clear sense of purpose and a clear sense of what needs to be done. I'm the kind of person that likes a long list of long-ranging objectives, but also short-term tasks. So I'm quite focused in how I deliver my work. I like the breadth of the chief executive role because I like to be busy. I perform highly if I'm busy. I like to be challenged. I like to learn new things. And I would say that I have high standards. So high standards both for myself, but also for those who I work with. And I challenge where people don't display high standards themselves.
Okay, nice one. And then finally, before I just finish on this, performance of the force in terms of its criminal justice performance, around crime reduction, around positive outcomes, around how the force challenges underperformance or challenges itself is really important as well, isn't it? Have you got any examples of where you've directly challenged the Chief Constable through the PCC, obviously, about performance that has been of concern at West Midlands?
Yes, I have some examples of that, and I'll pick an appropriate one for the audience. I have, as I think I mentioned it earlier on, I've worked in the holding to account role, and I ought to correct a technicality from Philip. Actually, I was the acting deputy chief executive, not the acting chief executive. I probably won't get away with letting that lie as it is, certainly with my colleagues back in the West Midlands. But in my role and in that acting post, I regularly participate in the holding to account meetings with the Chief Constable. And as we've mentioned previously, my specialist area is around the force workforce. And I do have examples of times when I have identified that performance is not as it might be and that corrective action needs to take place. I'd include the uplift example that I previously talked about, where I worked with, of course, a very willing force to put corrective steps into place to make sure that the uplift figures were being achieved. And that's been really successful, actually, and West Midlands Police are doing great on uplift now.
Okay, super. Thanks, Polly. Colleagues, does anybody have any questions for Polly before we invite Polly to say anything she wants to us? I think that's a resounding silence. I can't see any electronic hands waving at me or anything. So thank you, Polly. That's the questions from the panel. Is there anything that you'd like to ask or anything you'd like to say?
Well, I'd like to say, of course, thanks very much for having me. Thank you for a warm experience and asking me questions that are the things I was hoping you'd ask, I guess. I'd like to know either now or in the future what specific things that you're really interested in are. So what your priorities are as a panel are, and how I can organise the office to make sure that we support your interests and your areas of questioning. Yeah, and I suppose I'd just like to say I look forward to working with you in the future, all being well, and coming to Warwickshire and getting stuck in.
Okay, well, look, that's super. We would, as a panel, we'd welcome some conversations with you to explain to you some of the background and some of our aspirations as we move forward. Clearly, Derek and I currently hold the chairs, but we'll involve Nicola in any meeting you'd like to have with the chairs of the police and crime panel. And then we also have some performance subgroups where it would be great to sit down and just talk to you about some of our ambitions around how the performance and also the finance group operate going forward. So that's brilliant. What we're going to do now is I'm going to ask our colleague Deb to invite yourself and Philip to go into a holding area.
Okay.
While the panel debate and consider your application. So Deb, could we please show Philip and Polly and also Neil, I think, into the holding area?
Yeah, I'll just do that now. I do actually have to remove you from the meeting and invite you back in. Okay.
I presume, Chair, you'd like me to go as well. Neil Tipton.
Yes, please, Neil. Much as I like you, my boy, you're on the panel, so if you could just go into the holding area with everybody.
None taken.
And Neil Hewson. And can Carl stop the live stream?
We're live again.
Great, thanks, Deborah. Can we invite the PCC and Polly back in?
Just bear with me while I do so.
Please, could I just remind everybody to mute their microphones? How are we doing, Jane? Are we missing a PCC and a candidate?
We are indeed, and we haven't started the live broadcast yet, I don't think.
Okay, well, this is certainly going to be causing some concern in the West Midlands then, isn't it?
We're now live, Chair. We're just waiting for the PCC and Polly to join the panel.
Okay, thank you, Jane.
We have Neil Hewson back in the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
We're still trying to get the PCC and Polly back in. Yes, Carl, can you join the broadcast until we've got them back in? We've gone live again, Chair, thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Welcome back to our live feed of this selection panel. Philip Second and Polly, I am very pleased to tell you that the panel have unanimously supported the recommendation to appoint Polly as Chief Executive. We understand that you would like to take our verbal support as well as written support, but then make arrangements around our verbal support to support. So please do. And Polly, we very much look forward to working with you, and we would welcome the opportunity to have some early briefing meetings with you at your convenience. So many congratulations.
Thank you. That's excellent news. I'm delighted.
Dave, it's Philip here. Can I just say I'd like to thank Neil Hewison for doing advising me and being a right-hand man right the way through this whole process, which actually included, I think, putting a pretty good report to the panel, giving you the background and a summary of all the information we found out. And I'd just like to finish by congratulating Polly on finally, I think, now getting the job. And we very much look forward to working with you. I saw Jonathan Jardine yesterday, who is the Chief Executive of, as you know, the West Midlands OPCC, and they were very sorry to be losing you. And I think that speaks well. And we're very pleased here in Warwickshire that you're joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Philip. And Neil, we even managed to name check you in the interview, so that's not bad going. And we'll see you at the next meeting where we'll properly say our goodbyes, but just to echo Philip's sentiments at the time being. So everybody, that concludes this meeting. And I'm going to ask that we go off air unless anybody has got anything that they'd like to say. No? Right, well, thank you very much, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you at the next meeting with the Warwickshire Police and Crime Panel. And if we could stop the live meeting and end the meeting now.